thought I was married to a man who loved me. I thought the worst thing about our life together was that he sometimes forgot to put the toilet seat down, or that he would fall asleep during the movies I actually wanted to watch. I had no idea, none, that while I was busy building what I believed was our future, he had been quietly, methodically calculating how to strip away the only thing I had left of my grandmother. He did not just want the money she left me. He wanted to make me afraid enough to hand it over with trembling hands and say thank you. The night he put his fist through the cabinet door, I stood in the kitchen doorway in my socks on the cold tile floor and watched the man I had married turn into someone I had never seen before. The ceramic mug we bought together at a market in Prague, the one with the small chip on the handle that I kept meaning to throw away but never did, shattered against the wall and left a brown stain like a bruise. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving, his eyes fixed on me in a way that was not rage exactly, but something more deliberate than rage. It was a message. And in that moment, standing on the cold tile floor with the smell of broken coffee and plaster dust in the air, I finally understood what the message was. My name is Clara, and 3 years before that night in the kitchen, I was the kind of person who genuinely believed that love was enough. I know how that sounds, but I had watched my grandmother, a small, sharp-eyed woman named Irena, who had survived more in her lifetime than most people could imagine, build a quiet, dignified life out of practically nothing. And I believed that the same determination and warmth she poured into everything she touched could carry me through whatever came my way. She died in February, 14 months before the night Daniel smashed the kitchen. She was 81 years old, and she left me her apartment, a 2-room flat on the 4th floor of a building in the older part of the city, with tall windows that let in the morning light in long golden bars across the parquet floor. She left me the apartment and the money she had been saving for decades in a bank account that I did not even know existed until the notary read her will aloud in a room that smelled of old paper and radiator heat. I remember sitting in that notary's office and feeling something break open in my chest. Not the grief, which had already been living in me for weeks, but something else, something like being trusted. My grandmother had trusted me with the things she had spent her whole life protecting. The apartment was worth something, but the money in that account, 430,000 crowns, which she had been collecting with the meticulous patience of a woman who had once gone hungry, felt less like an inheritance and more like a message from her. A message that said, "You are capable. You are safe now. Take care of yourself." Daniel and I had been married for 2 years when she died. We lived in his apartment, a clean, unremarkable place with pale wood furniture and a parking space in the underground garage, the kind of apartment that could belong to anyone and felt like it belonged to no one in particular. He had been kind during the funeral, attentive in the way that people are attentive when they know they are being watched, pressing his hand to the small of my back as we stood at the graveside in the gray February cold. He had said all the right things. He had held me while I cried, and I had been grateful for him in the bruised and hollow way you are grateful for warmth when you are very cold. What I did not notice, what I was too raw and too exhausted to notice, was the moment his attention shifted. The moment he stopped looking at me in the notary's office and started looking at the numbers on the page. I replay that scene sometimes now, months later, sitting in the apartment that is finally fully mine. I replay it and I can see it so clearly, his jaw tightening very slightly, the quick and practiced stillness that settled over him like a mask being put on. But I was not looking at him then. I was looking at the notary's pen, tracing the line that transferred my grandmother's lifetime of careful saving into my name. The first weeks after the inheritance were oddly peaceful. I took a few days off work and went to the apartment alone, walking through the rooms slowly, touching things, the embroidered runner on the hallway table, the heavy curtains that smelled faintly of lavender, the collection of small glass animals she kept on the windowsill, each one placed with a precision that spoke of a person who believed that small, beautiful things deserved to be treated with seriousness. I sat in her kitchen and drank tea from her cups and let myself grieve in the specific, quiet way that is only possible when you are alone in a place where someone used to be. I did not think about the money at all during those days. Money felt like the wrong lens for grief. When I came home, Daniel was warm and solicitous, in a way that struck me, in retrospect, as slightly too deliberate. He had cooked dinner, pasta with a sauce that was better than his usual efforts, wine already open on the table, candles lit on the windowsill. I was touched by it. I told him about the apartment, about the glass animals on the windowsill, about the way the afternoon light came through the tall windows in bars of gold. And he listened with what I took for genuine interest. He asked questions. How old was the building? What neighborhood exactly? Had I thought about what I wanted to do with it? I said I wasn't sure yet. Maybe I would rent it out. Maybe I would eventually sell it and use the proceeds for something meaningful. A down payment on a house with a garden, something we could grow into together. He nodded slowly, as if considering this, and refilled my wine glass. It was only later, much later, that I understood those questions had not been curiosity. They had been reconnaissance. The first real warning sign came in April, about 6 weeks after the inheritance. We were sitting at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning, the good kind of Sunday morning, the kind with decent coffee and no particular plans, sun falling warm and yellow across the tablecloth. And Daniel said, very casually, as if mentioning the weather, that his friend Michal was looking for investment opportunities and had mentioned something about property funds. He said that the money sitting in a bank account was essentially losing value to inflation. He said he had been reading about it and there were better options available. His voice was light, almost indifferent, but his eyes were watching me over the rim of his coffee cup with an attention that did not match the lightness of his voice, a fixed and measuring quality that was there for only a second before he blinked it away. I told him I wasn't in any hurry to make decisions. The money was fine where it was for now. He nodded and let it drop, and I went back to my coffee and my sundae and forgot about it almost immediately, the way you forget about a small cloud passing across the sun on an otherwise bright day. It meant nothing. He was just thinking out loud. He was just being practical. That was what I told myself, and the telling was easy because I wanted it to be true. But the cloud did not disappear. It came back, in different shapes and at different angles, over the following weeks. He mentioned a colleague who had made money renovating apartments. He left an article on the kitchen counter about property investment, an actual printed article, which struck me as unusual since Daniel never printed anything. And when I picked it up and glanced at it, he came in from the other room and said, in that same light and offhand way, that it was just something interesting he had read. In May, he mentioned, twice within the same week, that his car was getting old and that he had been thinking about upgrading, but the timing wasn't right financially. Both times he said it while looking at me, and both times I felt a small, cold flutter low in my stomach that I immediately talked myself out of, rearranging it back into the shape of nothing. I was not a suspicious person by nature. I had been raised by a woman who gave people the benefit of the doubt as a matter of principle, who said that assuming bad faith was a form of disrespect, and I had absorbed that philosophy so thoroughly that it had become a kind of blindness. I looked for the most charitable explanation for everything Daniel did, and I found it, because the most charitable explanation was always available if you looked hard enough. He was stressed about work. He was feeling financially insecure. He was genuinely trying to be helpful with the money question. I stacked these explanations like sandbags against the trickle of unease that kept finding its way through, and for a while the sandbags held. What I did not know, what I had no way of knowing, was that while I was stacking my sandbags, Daniel was having conversations I was not part of. He was spending Sunday afternoons on the phone in the car, which I assumed were work calls and did not question because he had always been private about work. He was meeting his mother, Renata, for coffee on weekday afternoons, which I knew only because she mentioned it once in passing, and then, when she saw my expression, immediately changed the subject in the smooth and practiced way she had of redirecting conversations she had decided she did not want to have. Renata. Let me tell you about Renata. She was a small woman, compact and precise, in the way of someone who has always believed that neatness is a form of superiority. She dressed well in a deliberately understated way. Good quality fabrics, nothing flashy, everything chosen to communicate a kind of restrained elegance that she clearly believed distinguished her from women who tried too hard. She had worked for 30 years as an administrator in a regional government office, which had given her an intimate and thoroughly weaponized understanding of bureaucracy and paperwork. She kept her hair cut short and immaculate, wore the same pearl earrings every day, and smiled at me with a warmth that never quite reached her eyes, a warmth that was deployed precisely and deliberately, like a budget, spent only where it would produce returns. She had never fully approved of me. I understood this from our first meeting, though she was far too careful to say or do anything that could be pointed to as evidence. It was more of a temperature, a coolness beneath the surface warmth, a quality of evaluation in the way she looked at me that never went away, not even in moments when it would have been natural to set it down. She asked questions about my family with the interest of someone assessing collateral. She asked about my job. I was a project manager at a mid-sized engineering firm. A good job, a stable job, a job she clearly found somewhat beneath her idea of what her son's wife should be doing with her life. And she asked at our very first dinner together about my grandmother, with a sharpness of focus that I took at the time for ordinary family interest, and that I would later understand as something else entirely. I had spent 2 years talking myself into liking Renata. I had brought her flowers on her birthday and remembered the name of her cat, and sat through Sunday dinners that lasted 3 hours and left me feeling inexplicably hollowed out. And I had told myself that this was simply what it meant to be part of a family that was not the one you grew up in. That adjustment took time. That patience was a virtue. I had been patient in the way of someone who mistakes endurance for grace, and it had cost me a great deal. In June, 2.5 months after the inheritance, Daniel suggested that we should put the money from my grandmother's account into a joint account. He framed it as practicality. We were married, after all. What was the point of keeping finances separate? It was a leftover habit from our unmarried days that made no sense from a tax perspective, from a planning perspective, from any rational perspective he could name. He said all of this sitting across from me at a restaurant we liked, with the candlelight soft and golden between us, and the noise of other people's conversations creating a kind of private bubble. And he was very calm and very reasonable, and I found myself, for a disorienting moment, actually considering it, actually turning the idea over in my mind as if it were simply a household question with no particular weight. I said I would think about it. He nodded and smiled and ordered dessert and did not push further that evening. But something had shifted. Some quality of the air between us had changed, and I could not name it then, but I can name it now. It was the quality of a game becoming visible. Not to me. I was still far behind, still operating as if we were simply two people having a reasonable conversation about household finances. But he had moved a piece, and I had felt the move without understanding it, and the feeling settled into me like a stone dropped in still water, spreading in rings I could not stop and could not quite see. I did not put the money in a joint account. I had no specific reason, no evidence, nothing concrete enough to point to and say, this is wrong. It was instinct, the same wordless instinct that makes you step back from an open window even when you are not consciously aware of standing near one. I told Daniel, a few days later, that I wanted to keep the inheritance separate for now because it felt connected to my grandmother, and I needed more time to decide what to do with it. He accepted this with a patience that, in retrospect, I should have found more alarming than his pushing would have been. He accepted it, and he waited, and I had no idea that the waiting was part of the plan. By July, the atmosphere in the apartment had changed in ways that were too subtle to describe and too pervasive to ignore. Daniel had become quieter, not withdrawn, not cold, but thoughtful in a way that felt directed inward, as if he were calculating something I could not see. He was home more often, which at first I had liked, but the presence felt less like companionship and more like a kind of monitoring. He noticed when I was on the phone. He asked, casually, who I had been speaking to when I came home from a long call with my friend Petra, who was the only person I had been honest with about the low-grade unease I was carrying, and who had said, in her direct and unvarnished way, that I should talk to a lawyer before making any financial decisions, just as a precaution, just to understand my rights. I had not taken Petra's advice yet. I had meant to, in the same way I meant to make dentist appointments and sort through the boxes in the storage room. I put it in the category of things to do when I had a moment of uncluttered time, and the moment never quite arrived. I regret this so specifically and so viscerally that even now, writing it down, my chest tightens. If I had walked into a lawyer's office in July, if I had spent one single afternoon getting proper advice about how to protect an inherited asset, everything that happened after might have been different. Not prevented, perhaps, but handled from a position of knowledge rather than shock. Instead, I went on making coffee in the mornings and going to work and coming home and cooking dinners that were pleasant enough on the surface and giving off, somewhere beneath the pleasant surface, the faint and persistent smell of something that has been left too long in a room with the windows closed. It was a Tuesday in August when I found the folder. I had come home early. A meeting had been canceled, and I had left the office at 3 p.m. feeling the particular lightness of an unexpected free afternoon, a Tuesday that suddenly had space in it. Daniel was not home. The apartment was quiet in the dense and specific way of a place that has recently been occupied and has not yet reset to emptiness. A coffee cup in the sink still faintly warm when I touched the ceramic. A chair pulled slightly away from the table, as if someone had stood up in a hurry. I changed out of my work clothes, filled a glass of water at the sink, and sat down at the kitchen table with no particular purpose, letting the afternoon light move slowly across the floor tiles and feeling the tension of the workday releasing from my shoulders. I almost did not look. That is what I keep coming back to in the months since. I almost did not look. I had no impulse to, no suspicion sharp enough to push me across the room. I looked because the laptop on the counter had not gone to sleep yet, its screen still lit with a pale blue glow. And as I walked past to put my glass in the dish rack, I glanced at the screen the way you glance at any light in a quiet room. And I stopped. The document open on the screen was titled, in Daniel's careful, unhurried font, Transfer Plan, Irena's Account. My grandmother's name. My grandmother, who had been dead for 6 months. My grandmother, whose name Daniel had no reason to be writing in any document at all, whose account was mine and mine alone, whose 430,000 crowns were the careful and lifelong work of a woman who had trusted me with everything she had. Her name in a document called Transfer Plan on my husband's laptop on a Tuesday afternoon in August, on the kitchen counter, next to the coffee cup he had left in the sink. My hands were steady when I pulled out the chair and sat down. That surprised me, the steadiness of my hands. Inside, I had gone completely still in the way of a body waiting for a blow it can already sense is coming. But my hands were steady, and I sat down, and I read. The document was 4 pages long. It had been formatted with headings and subsections, the whole thing laid out with an administrative precision that bore Renata's fingerprints so clearly it was almost like hearing her voice. The first section outlined the amount in the account and noted, with a specificity that made something cold move through my chest, the current bank, the account number, and the exact date when probate had finalized the transfer into my name. The second section outlined a strategy in numbered steps. Daniel would first request that I add him as a co-signatory on the account, framing it as a sensible measure for married couples with shared financial goals. If this was declined, the backup strategy was to pressure me into transferring the full amount into an investment account, which had, listed in small print near the bottom of the page, Renata's name alongside Daniel's as joint account holder. The third section, and this was the part where the stillness inside me cracked open and something entirely different began to take its place, was titled pressure points and contained a numbered list. The list had 4 items. The 4th item read, in Daniel's careful font, "Escalate if necessary to ensure compliance." I sat in my kitchen in the August afternoon light and I read those 5 words, "Escalate if necessary to ensure compliance." And I understood with a clarity so complete it felt almost peaceful that I was not married to the person I had believed I was married to. The man I had believed I was married to would not have written the word compliance in reference to his wife. The man I had believed I was married to had not existed at all, or had existed only as a surface, a careful and patient performance mounted over a calculation that had been there from the beginning, as quiet and as deliberate as Renata's pearl earrings, as precise as the administrative files she had spent 30 years keeping in perfect order. I did not cry. I sat with this for a long moment and noticed that I did not cry, and the noticing felt important in a way I could not articulate yet. I took my phone from the pocket of my jeans. I photographed every page of the document, all 4 of them, slowly and carefully, making sure each image was clear. Then I closed the laptop and placed it back in exactly the position I had found it, walked to the bathroom, turned the cold tap on, and stood over the sink with the water running over my wrists, breathing slowly for a very long time. When Daniel came home that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table in exactly the same position he had left me in that morning, upright, hands folded around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold, the kitchen quiet and ordinary around me, the smell of warm flour and dish soap, and the faint trace of his coffee still in the air. He came in through the door with his keys in his hand and his jacket over his arm, and he stopped when he saw me. Just for a fraction of a second, a single blink of hesitation, a stillness so brief I might have imagined it. Then he smiled, his usual smile, easy and practiced and comfortable, and said that he had stopped at the shop. Did I want him to start dinner? How was my afternoon? I looked at him. I looked at the familiar lines of his face, the jaw I had kissed, the eyes I had looked into on our wedding day, the small scar above his eyebrow from a bicycle accident at 10 years old, the details of a person I had memorized with the thoroughness of genuine love, and I felt, with a precision that was almost surgical, the exact distance between who he was and who I had believed he was. It was not a distance you could measure. It was more like the negative space in a painting, the shape defined not by what is present, but by what is absent, by the hollow left behind where trust used to be. "Fine," I said. My afternoon was fine. I let him make dinner. I sat across from him and ate the pasta he cooked and answered his questions about my day and watched him talk about his colleague and a project deadline that was coming up, and I watched him with the new eyes that the document had given me, eyes that could see the performance now that the frame had been pulled away. He was good at it. He had the practiced ease of someone who had been at this for a long time, who had learned to layer warmth over calculation so smoothly that the seams were invisible. I had lived beside this performance for 3 years and never seen the seams. Sitting there, watching him salt his pasta and pour more water and lean back in his chair with the casual comfort of a man who believed the plan was proceeding smoothly, I felt something that was colder and quieter than anger. I felt myself deciding. That night, while Daniel slept beside me, I did not sleep at all. I lay in the dark with the sound of his breathing, slow and even, completely undisturbed. And I made a list in my head. Not a panicked list, not a list born of fear, but a methodical one, constructed step by step, with the kind of clarity that sometimes comes when everything you were confused about suddenly becomes simple. I needed a lawyer. I needed to understand the legal protections around inherited assets in a marriage. I needed to move the money, not spend it, not hide it, but secure it in a way that required my signature alone. And I needed to do all of this before Daniel or Renata knew I had seen the document, because the moment they knew, whatever plan they had would accelerate, and I needed to be ahead of it. I looked at the ceiling in the dark and I thought about my grandmother, who had saved 430,000 crowns over the course of a lifetime by putting away small amounts with steady, patient discipline, and who had trusted me with it not because I was the smartest or the most financially savvy person she knew, but because she believed I was strong enough. She had said that to me once, sitting in her kitchen with the afternoon light coming through the tall windows, not in the context of money or inheritance, but in the context of something else entirely. Some moment of self-doubt I was working through in my mid-20s, and she had reached across the table and taken my hand and said, "You are stronger than you know, Klarushka. You just haven't needed it yet." I had never forgotten that. Lying in the dark beside a man who was planning to take everything she had left me, I finally understood what she had been preparing me for. The following morning, I called Petra from the car park of my office building, sitting in the front seat with the engine running and the air conditioning on, because it was hot and I did not want to be overheard. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, the silence on the phone lasted exactly long enough for me to understand that she was choosing her words carefully. "You need a lawyer today," she said. "Not this week, today. Before he comes home tonight." I had an appointment by noon. The lawyer's office was on the third floor of a building near the city center, with a waiting room that smelled of new carpet and a receptionist who offered me water with the brisk efficiency of someone who understood that the people who came here were usually in some form of distress and did not need to be spoken to gently, just competently. The lawyer's name was Dr. Hanna Vishkova, and she was in her early 50s, trim and precise, with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and she listened to what I told her with the focused, unemotional attention of a person whose job was not to be shocked, but to be useful. When I finished, she asked me several questions: the date of the probate finalization, the type of account the inheritance was held in, whether I had signed anything at any point that could be construed as granting Daniel access, whether there was a prenuptial agreement. The answers satisfied her in the way that facts satisfy a person who works with facts, not warmly, but with a nod that said, "Good, this is workable." She told me that an inherited asset, properly documented and kept separate, had significant legal protection in the event of a dispute, and that the critical thing now was to ensure that the account had no shared access and that I moved quickly before any documents were presented to me for signature under pressure. "You said the plan includes pressure if asking fails," she said, looking at the photograph I had shown her on my phone, with the same expression she might have used to read a contract clause. "What kind of pressure do you think he means?" I did not know how to answer that. I said that I wasn't sure. She nodded slowly and made a note. "Be careful," she said. "People who plan this carefully don't improvise well when the plan stops working. That is when things can become unpleasant." She held my eyes for a moment over her reading glasses, making sure I understood that unpleasant was a professional understatement. I understood. I moved quietly for the next 2 weeks. I visited the bank and had a conversation with a manager I had never met before, a young man with a careful tie and an apologetic manner, about the security settings on the account. I did not change anything that would be immediately visible, but I understood precisely and in writing what was required to authorize any transaction, and I had a written record of that conversation. I transferred a portion of the money, not all of it, just enough to make an immediate large transfer impossible without a second authorization step I had specifically requested, to a secondary account that existed only in my name and that Daniel had no knowledge of, in a bank we did not use together. Dr. Vishkova had advised this. She had used the word prudent. It was the most useful word anyone said to me that entire month. At home, I was very careful. I was the same Clara I had always been, making coffee in the mornings, leaving the newspaper on Daniel's side of the table, asking about his day, cooking dinners that were unremarkable and domestic, and gave him no reason to suspect that anything had changed. I was so careful, in fact, that I almost convinced myself. There were moments in the evenings, watching television on the sofa with his shoulder warm against mine, the apartment lit and comfortable around us, when the version of our life that I had believed in until August felt almost real again, like a house you had lived in that had burned down, but whose ghost you could still walk through if you were very still and very sad. I was not still. I was building. On a Thursday evening in September, Renata came to dinner. This was not unusual. She came to dinner perhaps once a month, always bringing something: a cake, a jar of preserves, flowers from a garden that seemed to produce exactly the right bouquet for whatever diplomatic purpose was currently required. She came in with her pearl earrings and her careful smile and her slightly too thorough survey of the apartment, the quick eyes that moved across surfaces as if taking inventory, and she kissed both my cheeks and said I looked tired and asked if I had been sleeping properly. I said I had been sleeping fine. She looked at me for a fraction of a second too long. Dinner was lamb and roasted vegetables, and the conversation was the usual conversation: Daniel's work, Renata's neighbors, a cousin's new baby, a story about a supermarket that had changed its layout in a way she found deeply unreasonable. I sat and ate and answered and smiled, and I watched them. I watched the frequency with which Daniel's eyes moved to his mother's. I watched the small adjustments: a cleared throat, a shift in subject when something edged too close to uncomfortable, that passed between them with the ease of people who had been coordinating in private. I watched Renata's gaze settle on me at intervals with a quality of appraisal that she had been deploying for 2 years, but that I was seeing clearly for the first time. After dinner, while Daniel was washing dishes, Renata sat across from me at the table with her hands folded around her wineglass and said, in the warm and measured voice she used when she was about to say something she had rehearsed, that she had been thinking about the inheritance. She said she hoped I didn't mind her mentioning it. She knew it was a sensitive subject, but she was family, and she worried. She said that money sitting idle in a bank was a lost opportunity, that she had done some research, that there were very good options available that could secure the future for both of us, for the whole family. She let the word family rest on the table between us like a stone. I looked at her. I looked at the pearl earrings and the careful hair and the rehearsed warmth and the eyes that had never once looked at me without calculating something behind them. And I said, very pleasantly, that I appreciated her concern and that I had everything well in hand. Nothing more. She looked at me for just a moment with an expression I had not seen on her face before, a flash of something sharp and assessing. And then the warmth came back like a blind being pulled down, and she said, of course, she just wanted to help, as she always did. Daniel came in from the kitchen with his hands still slightly damp, and Renata glanced at him, and something passed between them in the silence that I now had the clarity to read. It said, not yet. It said, she's not ready. It said, we need another approach. The kitchen incident happened on a Friday in October, 7 weeks after I had found the document, 3 weeks after Renata's dinner, 1 week after I had told Daniel, as gently and as finely as I could manage, that I was not going to be placing the inheritance into any joint account or investment structure, that the money was mine and I was keeping it, and that I was asking him not to raise the subject again. He had been silent when I said this. The kind of silence that is not the absence of words, but the presence of decision. He had looked at me across the kitchen table and said, in a voice that was very controlled, we'll talk about this more. Not a question, a statement. I had said, there is nothing more to talk about, and I had meant it. The Friday it happened, I came home at 6 p.m. to find Daniel already there, which was unusual. He was standing in the kitchen with the stiffness of a person who has been waiting. Not relaxed waiting, not distracted waiting, but the coiled and deliberate waiting of someone who is built up to something. The kitchen light was too bright. He had not turned on any of the softer lamps in the other rooms, only the harsh overhead light in the kitchen, and the effect was stark and flat, and somehow, I realized later, entirely intentional. He started talking before I had put down my bag. He said he had spoken to his mother. He said that they were both concerned that I was being, and he paused here, choosing the word with visible care, unreasonable. He said that 430,000 crowns was a significant amount of money that was at risk of simply sitting there, losing value, while I refused to consider any rational options. He said that he was my husband and that we were supposed to be building a life together, and that my unwillingness to include him in financial decisions was beginning to feel like a deliberate exclusion, like I was choosing to keep a wall between us, like I did not trust him. His voice was still controlled, but underneath the control there was a current that I had not heard before, a current that was tight and pressurized, like water that has been dammed for a long time. I set my bag down on the chair. I looked at him, and I said very quietly, "I know about the document, Daniel." The silence that followed was unlike any silence I have ever experienced. It was not the silence of surprise. His face did not change in the way of a person who has been caught off guard. It changed in a different way, a harder way, the face of someone who has had a contingency plan for this moment and is now switching over to it. The warmth left his eyes as completely as if a light had been switched off. "What document?" he said, not a question. "The transfer plan," I said. 4 pages, with your mother's name on the joint account, with the section called Pressure Points, with the item about escalating to ensure compliance. He stood very still, and then something broke in him. Not in the emotional sense, not in the cracking open sense, but in the structural sense, the way a load-bearing thing breaks when it has been under too much pressure for too long. He took the coffee mug from the counter, the new one, not the Prague one, that one was already gone, and he threw it against the kitchen cabinet. It did not shatter cleanly. It made a dense, ugly sound and left a dent in the cabinet door and broke in 2 large pieces on the floor. Then he put both hands flat on the counter and leaned over it with his head down, breathing. I did not move. I stood very still with my hands at my sides and my heartbeat loud in my ears, and I watched him, and I thought with extraordinary clarity, so this is what escalation looks like. This is the word from page 3, item 4. This is what he meant. Not a shout, not tears, not argument, a demonstration. A controlled display of what force was available to him if he chose to use it. He wanted me to see the dent in the cabinet and understand that the next dent could be in something else. He wanted me to feel the cold wash of physical fear and let it carry me to the bank. I felt the cold wash. I will not pretend I did not. I felt it move through me from my scalp to my feet in a single swift current, leaving my hands slightly cold and my legs slightly unsteady. And then it passed, the way cold water passes. It moves through you, and it is gone, and you are still standing. "I'm going to need you to leave," I said. My voice was level. "Tonight. Take what you need for a few days." He turned and looked at me with something in his face that I did not have a name for then, and still do not have a name for now. It was complex and layered in a way that real emotions are complex and layered. Not the clean, theatrical emotion of a villain, but the messy, guilty, frustrated emotion of a person who wanted something and cannot understand why the wanting does not make it available to him. He started to speak. I held up one hand. "I have copies of the document," I said. "I have spoken to a lawyer. I have made the necessary arrangements with the bank. There is nothing to negotiate. Please go." He went. The weeks that followed were not simple. I want to be honest about that, because the stories that say it gets easy once you make a decision are lying to you. It does not get easy. It gets different, harder in some ways, lighter in others, the way a house feels both emptier and larger when a piece of heavy furniture has been removed. I stayed in the apartment alone and learned to sleep through the absence of his breathing beside me, and some nights the learning was harder than others. Petra came and spent 2 weekends with me, bringing wine and the specific practical comfort of someone who does not catastrophize and does not offer false reassurances, who instead sits with you in the real shape of things and helps you see that the real shape is livable. Renata called me 3 times in the first week. The first call was the voice of wounded dignity. She said she was deeply disappointed, that she had only ever wanted what was best for us, that she hoped I would reconsider. The second call was the voice of threat, wrapped in concern. She said that Daniel was very distressed, that my actions were damaging him, that she hoped I understood the consequences of what I was doing to her son. The third call, I did not answer. Dr. Vishkova sent a letter on my behalf, formal and precise, and written in the specific language of someone who has all the paperwork and is not afraid to use it, advising that further contact regarding the inheritance would be treated as harassment and documented accordingly. The calls stopped. Daniel's lawyer sent a letter in November suggesting that the inheritance, acquired during the marriage, should be considered a shared marital asset. Dr. Vishkova responded with the probate documentation, the bank records showing the account had been opened in my name alone before and after the marriage, and a legal analysis that was, in her words, thorough. She used that word the way other people use the word devastating. She also flagged the document I had photographed, the transfer plan, the pressure points, the escalation, as evidence of coercive intent, and noted that the incident in the kitchen had been witnessed by no one, but that I had photographed the damaged cabinet door the morning after and had a contemporaneous record. The letter from Daniel's lawyer was not followed by another letter. By December, Daniel and I had reached a formal separation agreement. He kept the apartment, his apartment, as it had always been, and I moved back into my grandmother's flat, the one with the tall windows and the parquet floors and the long bars of morning light. I took the glass animals from the windowsill where she had left them and placed them exactly as she had placed them, each one in its particular position, which I knew by heart without being able to explain how. And I stood in the kitchen in the winter afternoon with the radiators ticking and the smell of old wood and old warmth, and I felt, for the first time in many months, that I was standing on ground that was entirely my own. Renata sent one final message, not by phone, but in a handwritten note that arrived in December, on notepaper with her address embossed at the top. It said, in her precise and characterless handwriting, that she forgave me for the damage I had done to her family, and that she hoped one day I would understand that everything she had done had been out of love for her son. I read it once, I set it on the kitchen table, and then I put it in the recycling bin, which felt like the most accurate response available to me. It is April now, and the mornings in the apartment are extraordinary. The light comes through the east-facing windows at an angle that turns everything warm and gold for about 40 minutes after sunrise, and I have started waking early to sit at the kitchen table with coffee and watch it move across the parquet floor, the way a tide moves, slow and inevitable, and completely indifferent to whether you are watching or not. The glass animals on the windowsill catch the light and throw small rainbows on the wall, and I watch them, and I think about my grandmother, who placed them exactly there, knowing what the morning light would do with them. The money is still in the account, all of it, 430,000 crowns, unchanged, untouched, exactly as she left it. I have a plan for it now, a real one. Part of it will renovate this apartment, which needs a new bathroom and a kitchen that does not smell of the 1980s every time you run hot water. Part of it will go toward the small business I've been planning with Petra for 2 years, the one we kept putting off because the timing was never right, and then because I was afraid, and then because I was distracted by a marriage that was something other than what I believed it to be. The rest will stay exactly where it is, because my grandmother understood something I am only now fully learning, that money kept safely and quietly in your own name is not a failure of generosity. It is a form of self-respect. I lost something in all of this. I want to be clear about that. I lost the 3 years I spent inside that marriage and the version of the future I had built around it. The house with the garden, the life that had Daniel in it, the particular sweetness of believing you are safe. I lost the innocent trust that had been, until that Tuesday afternoon in August, one of the qualities I most liked in myself. I will not pretend these losses are small, or that they do not still announce themselves at unexpected moments. On an ordinary evening when I pass a restaurant we used to like, or on a Sunday morning when the apartment is so quiet, the silence has its own texture. They are losses, and they are real, and they are mine to carry. But I am carrying them in my grandmother's apartment, in the morning light, with coffee that I have made to my own taste, and a calendar that has only my plans in it, and a door that locks from the inside. And that counts for something. That counts for more than I knew how to count before all of this taught me how. She was right, my grandmother. I was stronger than I knew. I just had not needed it yet.